Welcome back for the second round of this workshop. Thank you very much for the fascinating discussion that we had in the first part of the workshop, and also to our project experts for the fantastic questions that they pose. So the first question here is related to professional enablers. We are all lawyers in this room, more or less. So we are speaking about our categories, but also accountants, auditors. So what has emerged clear in all workshops and what has emerged in our research is that this kind of crimes, especially VAT, carousel fraud, tax evasion, they are quite complex, and there is a need for people that can create are facilitating these crimes or enabling these crimes, creating shell companies, or giving tax advice on how evade the taxation. This is happening almost everywhere, of course. Or sometimes when we speak about corruption, what emerged is that it's difficult that the authorities has a direct contact with the tax debtor that doesn't want to pay, but there is always an intermediary. And these intermediaries are usually professionals. So having said that, let's start some question about this topic. So the first question is, according to your experience, which categories of professional enables, that bankers, brokers, accountants, internal auditors, external auditors, tax lawyers, and so on, are most involved in facilitating tax crimes or enabling tax crimes in your jurisdiction? Dimitrios, please.
Yes, I would say, at least from my experience, that the accountants maybe are the most, let's say, prominent profession regarding tax evasion, or I mean enabling tax evasion. I think especially after the most of the activities or the interaction with the tax authorities became electronical, tax accountants still have the possibility to come into contact in person tax authorities. So I think maybe that's a vulnerable point. But also auditors would also be, I would also count them also to the category you mentioned. Auditors could also advise or provide some information about possible ways. But yes, that's at least that's how my feeling, let's say.
That's very interesting. Any other comments on this? Cases that you know? Antonis, please.
Dimitrios has covered it complete from my point of view.
Okay, so let's go to the second sub question. So basically, how often are tax-related professionals subject to disciplinary sanctions or disqualification measures, for example, lawyers for unethical conduct to debarment, for illicit or unethical conducts related to their professional work in the area of taxation in Greece? Is this happening a lot? Is this happening rarely, that they are, debarred, or what? Please. Please, Anthony.
I haven't heard of any case of lawyers being debarred. Probably auditors might have some problems from their point of view, but I'm not aware of it.
Yeah, okay, this is common. A common answer. It's very rare that the lawyers are debarred. So this is also the case for Greece. Okay, then I have another sub-question here, is that the contiguity. So this is an issue of contiguity. Is the contiguity between the professional enablers and the tax authorities, or of course, judicial prosecuting authorities, something that can create unconscious bias or conflict of interest in a way? What do you think? Any idea on the role, the preferential role, for example, that a lawyer has, that has access to the discussion with tax authorities, official or judges? Is this position something that can create a risk? Okay, let's go on, and then if maybe the experts can speak about that a bit. When there is an attempt by tax evader to unduly influence tax office officials, that can be the case, and we said you mentioned a couple of potential cases when this can happen. What are the channels or schemes that they use usually? I mean, for example, there was a very interesting point that was raised by you when you said that basically because the tax authorities are the one that have must file the prerequisite document to start a prosecution, this can raise issue of corruption. Yeah, but how these schemes of corruption work? Direct conduct or use of intermediaries? How, if you know this is happening? Oh, we have Christos.
I wanted to say before, to answer your questions. First of all, lawyers and accountants are never prosecuted, nearly never, without, let's say, wiretapping. Without wiretapping, you don't know that if a lawyer or an accountant is a member of a criminal organization. Okay, because the lawyer and the accountant are outside the criminal behavior, and they are professionalists. So only by means of using wiretapping, you can, by listening to the phone calls and so on, you can understand maybe that a lawyer, somebody, or an accountant is a member of a criminal organization conducting tax crimes. Okay, that is the first point of view. So they are nearly never prosecuted the lawyers, and and in my opinion, no tax crime can take place without an accountant. Okay, no tax crime can take, but the accountant gives the advice, and he's nearly never prosecuted. Okay, only by wiretapping, as I said, if you have a criminal organization in money laundering and so on. That is the first point of view. Then, as far as what you said about the role of the lawyer in the process before the tax authority, in my opinion, there is the corruption in this field is lower than we could expect. In my opinion, the tax authority makes a job in most of the cases in a way that it should, and no corruption takes place in that. What we should ask ourselves maybe is in some cases these persons who make the investigation in the pre-trial stage then come to court after some years, and they might change their point of view when they are asked by the lawyers. And this is a question: why this might happen? Because when you read the report of the tax authority, you say, "Oh, this person should be condemned." This is very clear. And when you go to court and you ask this person who wrote the report, he might change his opinion. And then you have to ask yourself, why did the tax authority a person, when asked as a witness in order to clarify his report, why did he now does he say that I'm not sure, or he doesn't say the things as he reported in the pre-trial stage? That is sometimes the case, and we should ask ourselves why this might happen. Okay.
Christos, thank you very much. I think that you cover fantastic aspects that are an interconnections between phenomenon and procedure. And you're right. I try to say every time that without phone tappings we cannot unveil corruption, and we know that. But this is a battle that we lose a lot of times. But thank you, very clear points. So in the relation to the enablers of financial crime, so these professionals, the project experts. So Nikos, please.
I had a question with respect to real estate related tax evasion, and whether the real estate agents that can play a facilitative role in that is at all on the agenda in Greece.
Thank you. Who would like to try to answer? Yannis, please, Yannis.
Yes, actually the real estate property is taxed like it's more like an income tax now, and there are the value of the real estate property is set by a system of objective instruments. It's regulated by the state. So the state says how much value has a real estate property in order to be taxed. The state has evolved an objective system of real estate property prices. So there is no problem with that in Greece, because the state sets the property prices and then attributes the tax on them.
Fantastic, thank you. Vasilis.
No, from my point of view, I don't have a question. Actually, I just wanted to make a remark that some kind of disciplinary sanctions may be imposed not only according to tax, to the tax legislation, but according to the money laundering and the organized crime legislation. But this is more or less covered also by Christos. So it's I think it's okay by me.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go on the one that is one crucial question for our research project, because we are looking at the intersections between tax crimes and corruption. Now, when we speak about corruption, we were already covering, what is usually classified as corruption, so bribery, the direct bribe to a public official. Now we would like to explore something that is emerging quite important in all the countries we are looking at, and even in the United States and other countries, that is corrupt practices that go beyond bribery. When we do say this, these practices sometimes are not criminalized, so maybe not directly recognized as corruption, strict sense in our legislation, but are unethical, undue practices that are adopted. For example, pressure groups that try to adopt, do unethical lobbying for adopting, reducing, the sanctions, applicable sanctions, and Christos was very clear to us. He said, no, there is a long period of time, and within this long period of time, the legislation can change, and because we cannot apply, we have to apply the legislation is most favorable to the perpetrators, then they are not convicted. But who decides this? So our analysis is the highest level now. So this is a scheme. This is not; these things do not happen randomly in our legislation. So these are reasoned things. There are groups of pressure, lobbyists that do this and decide these kind of things to take advantage of that. So let's try to speak about a bit this kind of things. So can you identify any institutional vulnerability that can facilitate such influence in the fight against corruption and tax crimes? Please.
I'd like to begin the discussion on this subject. It's very complex because lobbying, which I think has been implied in your question, is not regulated at all in Greece. Just the last week, it is currently been on the Open Government website for discussion, a draft law for lobbying. Now, I don't think it is adequate for our questions because it has no consequences at all for the persons being lobbied. There will be a lobbyist registry, but the proposal is not to have open diaries for the persons who make the decision from the executive and the legislative, persons having legislative and executive powers. So this is this might be characterized as an important deficiency. Now, and another problem is that there is not only in tax-related matters, but in general, there is not proper trail for legislative and regulation decisions. There is an explanatory report which might be adequate or it might not be, the latter being most usually the case. And this is a major problem in order to identify if pressure groups have applied pressure in order to find out. And all that leads with other legislative discrepancies and problems to not identifying the actual legislative procedure behind the typical the typical forms reserved for each and every case. So this is actually a problem, and I think in tax-related crimes and and smuggling, of course, which are much more complex in order to find the rates, the tax and smuggling rates, a big problem for the Greek regulation and legislative procedure.
This is fantastic, Antonis. Very important insights. Very interesting also the issue about the draft legislation to regulate lobbying in its deficiencies. I asked Vasilis to make a little scheme about that in the national report, but we have Ioannis and then Dimitrios. So Ioannis, please.
May I add a few examples about institutional vulnerabilities? The first one is the reform of the Financial Crime Unit, where some powers that the unit had were removed from it. And also the reform of the prosecutor about corruption and his consolidation with the economic prosecutor. There are different opinions about the handling of the specific cases. And let me add about the Greek administration feudalistic landscape, where the collaboration between some agencies is problematic because there is a lot of times that they are promoting each one single agency's interests. There is no collaboration or exchange of knowledge due to the fear of losing their power. And there are times where two different agencies, they are investigating the same case. And there is a waste of time, waste of resources, and conflicting results.
Ioannis, this is a very interesting point. One point that if you can expand a bit is how they, in a way, manipulated the special prosecutor office and interconnected it. I understood it, but in which way you think this has been affected in a negative way? In which way he's not more effective? Can you explain this, because this is not clear?
Yes, because the economic crime prosecutor has specific cases to investigate, and the corruption, the prosecutor about corruption, has had different powers in his position to investigate in more depth the cases characterized as corruption cases. And I think the consolidation to one prosecution officer, prosecution office, I don't think that it's towards a positive way to handle big and serious cases about this.
And Ioannis, this is very clear now. This is, of course, is a symptom of a corruption or unethical
Exactly.
influence. Can you try to make the jump? Can you try to explain to us what do you think is the architect of this and why? Because that's the where it lies, you know, the undue influence.
There are lobbying interests to behind all this. I think that it's not random, and it's for a reason. For example, the Independent Tax Authority was prerequisite an obligation from the debtors from Greece, and the orientation of all this, it's not to combat serious economic crimes, but to just deal with minor cases.
Okay, this is clear. Thank you, Ioannis. Yes, so the big lobbying wealth individuals, this is happening in a lot of countries, not only in Greece. Of course, this is why we are focusing on this in our research. Dimitrios and then Ioannis, the other one. Dimitrios.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that regarding the big scale, some years ago, some of the big scandals, the big corruption scandals in Greece had also to do with the finance of the parties. So I think the context now is a bit different. So I don't know, we haven't heard about a big scandal like that the last years. I don't know if this is because of the change of the context, but I mean, it had to do with the financing of the parties, at least at the past.
Dimitrios, this is very interesting because, of course, this was situational. So it was that. But what was I understand the cause here. What was the effect when they changed the law on corruption?
The law on corruption also changed a lot, especially after 2014.
Yeah, that was the case in which there.
Regarding the financing of the parties, I think what changed is the transparency regarding the procedure about financing. But I'm not an expert there. I don't know. Okay. I'm not quite sure about that. But the corruption law changed a lot the last years, especially in the beginning of the first decade of 2000 and also 2014. And I have to say, regarding lobbying, something relevant is also that we have a provision for, let's say, cultivation of klima or something like that. So giving money without a certain, not for a certain action of a public officer, but in order to make a general positive klima. That's also an offense in Greece. So that could be related to lobbying.
This is interesting. This is definitely interesting, and I think that the burden of what is giving this money, or if you give a package to all the politicians that are elected with something because you are a big multinational, this won't be, of course. So yeah, this is a very tricky point. Thank you, Dimitrios, to say that. Ioannis.
Thank you, Constantino. I would like to share my opinion about the consolidation of the two offices of the economical prosecutor and the corruption prosecutor office. First question is, do we need special prosecutors? And what does this concentration of powers to one person do. Second, and that's the reason, in my opinion, this was not the reason was not some kind of lobbying. The reason was the misuse of the office to pursue political objectives during the last regime, and we all know that we live in Greece. So when they decided to prosecute and to try to prosecute political persons for certain affairs, and they left all the other job behind, and we know that for a fact because during my activity as a lawyer, I observed that in the last days of this office, so in the last days of the corruption prosecutor being a separate office, we all started receiving subpoenas for certain cases that were very old. That means that they have left the real job undone in order to play a political game, and that was the reason. That was one of the reasons, at least, that the two special prosecution officers were made one, and that's I think that's part of the truth of being true for these reasons. It was not only lobbying; the persons played a role too, and the use of this office. Now, the second point about the do we need special prosecutor for financial crimes? Now, let's make an observation. The financial unit, the SDOE in Athens, now the economic prosecutor in Athens is located, his office is not in the district attorney's office. It's not in the prosecutor's office. It's not in the. It's not in Loukareos. It's in another place. It's with the public servants of the financial unit. That means that has one. It has one advantage and one disadvantage. The advantage is that the financial prosecutor, the economic prosecutor, the special prosecutor has its own judicial police. And there is not, and that means that he can pursue his cases with experts, and he has his team with him. That's the advantage. The disadvantage is that he is not a tax lawyer. He's not acquainted with tax law. He's acquainted with criminal law. That means, and that was a point made in legal theory. I do not claim that I've said that there was a point made in legal theory that this way the members of the financial unit take over the DA's office, take over the prosecutor's office, because they make the reports, they investigate the cases. The prosecutor has no special tax knowledge. He has to rely on them, and so they take over his office. And that's the main problem with having special prosecutors for financial crime. I don't know, maybe Yanis may disagree, but this was a point made in the legal theory by more than one professors in the past. Thank you.
Yanis, thank you very much. I mean, you covered two very important aspects. One is the abuse of tax authorities and prosecuting authorities for political schemes. This is happening. We had this exactly same or similar issue raised by Bulgaria in the workshop. So they use tax authorities to punish a corporation and total line with the power and the majority. So this is happening. We know that. And also it's important the knowledge gap. So when you have prosecutors that they don't know the matter, they can be taken over by the one that have the specialization. We know this. This is an issue. So Yanis, would you like to briefly say something?
Just to add something about offense of misconduct in public bodies about or related in corruption. There has been changes in the law that the prosecutor has to investigate it after a formal complaint has been made, instead of, for example, an anonymous complaint or something else. And this formal complaint is really very deterring someone to make a complaint or something in order to start the investigation. And at this point, may you please excuse me because I have an obligation to attend.
That's fine. Thank you so much for being with us for all this time and for your fantastic comments. Thank you, Ioannis.
Thank you very much.
Also from me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
So I think that you have covered this question amazingly. There is no sense to go to the other sub-question. I would like directly to give the words to Nikos and Vasilis and or Donato if they would like to intervene, specifying something that is important to say, please.
I don't have much to say. The only other item that we haven't brought up much, but does occupy the foreign press, sometimes the Greek press as well, is the preferential tax treatment of ship owners and what they do or do not contribute to the Greek economy and the GDP. And the lobbying and the pressures that they have been using over the years for the special privileges that they have. So some section of the report perhaps could cover that issue as well.
Vasilis, please, this is a very good point. And I asked the expert to answer because, of course, if there is a part of the economy that is particularly important for the country, of course, they have lobbying power and, of course, they have special treatments. So any comment on this? Because it's a very good question. Thank you, Nikos.
Just comment on that. I think, well, how I also agree with Nikos. And it's just to say that this specific legislation concerning these ship owners' tax privileges was actually was raised, and somehow it became apparent also in the Greek state during the military dictatorship. And this is one of the laws that remained actually until today. And up to a point, it was also protected in the constitution. So you can say that, yes, there is a kind of lobbying, but it's somehow it's the basis of the Greek economy. So this is also something that it can be understood. I mean, if you change this tax law, it's not that in the end of the day more money will come to Greece. They will just change the way they let their ships being taxed. They will be taxed, I don't know, in Cyprus or in Panama or in other places. So this is perhaps a very special case, I would say, because shipping is it's of course related to a country, but it's more or less international. It's not that you can just stay here and be taxed.
This is amazing, Vasilis, if you can include that in the report with this observation, of course, because what we are looking what is emerging that in various countries, there is these limits. You cannot actually impose taxation in some economic important areas because there is an issue of competitive disadvantage. And if you do this, you lose money, you don't get money. And that's why they are discussing about the global tax regime and so on to try to avoid these issues. So thank you very much. Now, the next question, we already answered a bit. This is about institutional vulnerabilities in terms of investigation. So one is, I think the best person to answer this will be Christos, and is about, do you think that in your jurisdiction, authorities that fight against tax crimes and corruption have been given enough powers and then also resources in all terms? So personnel, skills, computing power. So what is the situation, if you can depict it? Please.
Okay. First of all, I must say that I'm not, today I'm not a financial prosecutor. I was until January, okay, in order to be precise. Okay, the problems are many. First of all, the change of the powers. We have an institution called Financial Police in Greece, and we have another institution, a member of which is Mr. Ioannis Blatsos, who was present, which is called SDOE, which means a body of prosecution of economic crime, let's say, and the staff was mixed. Many people went from one body to another, and let me tell you that only, for example, Financial Police is today the body which conducts financial controls, whereas the other body, SDOE, is the body which conducts money laundering controls. Or it is searching, both bodies are searching the bank accounts. Okay, so we have two different bodies, and 1/3 in Athens only, located in Athens, next to the prosecutor's office for financial crimes. So we have three bodies, mainly two for the whole Greece, which have different jurisdiction and different powers, and the law is changing very many times the last years, has changed many times the last years. So many cases were sent first to one body, then returned from this body, and then sent to the other body. So times goes on, and these cases are not investigated. Okay, because they tell you we don't have many people to deal with the cases, we don't have much staff, or they say now we changed our jurisdiction and we cannot carry out a financial control. We're only, for example, we're only specialized for corruption crimes or money laundering. So the cases go from one body to the other, and we lose time in this way. We lose the necessary time. If we add many changes of the law, whenever the law changes, many people will be acquitted. That is the truth. That is, maybe if we need to make a statistical investigation analysis, but we will find out that whenever the law changes, many people are acquitted. Okay, many defendants. So all this, if we take also into consideration that the biggest companies have lawyers and all the specialized staff in order to make it legal. Okay, to make the way they, for example, let's take an example of a pharmacy, a big pharmacy company. Okay, they won't give you money in order to prescribe, let's say, they won't give you money in your bank account, but they might say, oh, we need some investigation. Will you take part in the investigation we're carrying out? And we will pay you for this investigation. You are a very good doctor, and we need the doctors for our investigation. Okay, or they might say, we are organizing a very important seminar, let's say, in a beautiful island during the summer. And we will pay everything for you, but we need you in order to take part and say your opinion, because you are a very good doctor and we need you.
This
Okay,
is
we will
very
pay,
clear.
we will pay everything for you.
This is
Okay.
clear, Christos. This is fantastic, and it's important. So, if I'm not misunderstood, so we have at the same time issue about competences, the change over time within the three authorities, and makes everything complicated and time-consuming. And at the same time, there are issue of resources that also go in this mechanism. So, I understand the problematics. Now, a more specific question to you is there a gap of knowledge, do you think, between the knowledge and skills that you have in the public sector and the knowledge or skill of the top law firm and accountancy firm like the Big Four? Is there this kind of big gap, and how this affect fighting against corruption and tax evasion?
Okay, I will answer. We need specialized staff. When these bodies I told you need to hire people, they might hire lawyers, okay, who don't know anything about financial crime, and they need to be trained. They don't know anything about asset recovery. They don't know anything about tax crimes. They might be just lawyers who change their job. Okay, so in not only in Greece, but in general, we need law enforcement seminars. Many law enforcement seminars are organized by CEPOL, for example. Okay, but they are organized at a European level, not at a national one. They will tell you they will give you much information about the directives of the European Union, but they will not help you in your everyday working life. Okay, this we need specialized seminars for the new hired professionals. Okay.
Yeah.
Because
this is very clear, Christos. So if you can expand on this, because okay, so what we experience in our research is that there is this gap, let's say, of knowledge. Then you can, if you give training to them, if you train them and they become good at it, then they leave the public service and they go and work to law firms and to Big Four and they earn a lot of money. And so there is two effects here I want to you to speak about. The first effect is the brain drain. So the best brains are taken away from public service. And the second one is the phenomenon of the revolving door. So the fact that they were influential in the public service and they go and work for these private entities is this contiguity creating issue in terms of course, investigation, prosecution. So please.
Let me tell you, in my experience, this phenomenon is not so wide in Greece. So not so many civil servants leave the civil factor to go to the private one. Maybe in Athens, maybe in very specialized places. I don't know, but the problem that I pointed out is that is the lack of specialized knowledge for this staff who don't know how to find the crime. Many of them have only financial knowledge and not at all legal knowledge. And they cannot give you enough information to prosecute. Okay, they explain it as if writing to another person and not a prosecutor. Okay, not to professional legal persons.
This is very clear. Thank you, Christos. And to the other experts, any comment about the revolving door issue? So the passage from private to public and public to private, from top offices sometimes that is even more complex now?
As far as I know, it is somehow common in Greece, for example, some prosecutors before retiring to become, or after retiring, to become lawyers. But I wouldn't say that this is something that we should avoid. Okay, they might become lawyers, but they go to the private sector, but that is not a negative point, in my opinion. Okay, I don't know if the other people would like something to add on this. We don't have a phenomenon in such a.
Who would like to join in the discussion? Because for example, in Italian jurisdiction, this is also common that the prosecutors become lawyers at the end of the career. And of course, they may be, I was a criminal lawyer for many years, and I felt a bit of the disadvantage when my colleague was an ex-prosecutor that knew very well all the other judges. So I think that honestly, there can be a contiguity that we can discuss, but this is my opinion. Dimitrios.
No, I just want to say, like Christos said, that I don't think it's so usual here in Greece. I mean, they mostly, I don't know any cases of people, it's at least in the last years, also because of the crisis in Greece, the private sector was very, nobody could be sure about what is going to happen. And while the public sector was considered to be more secure. So especially in the last years, I don't think that we have such a phenomenon here in Greece, this revolving door.
Thank you very much, Dimitrios, and this is a very good explanation for that. So let's go on. We spoke about that. So now the next question is about corporate criminal liability. So corporations, can corporations be subject to criminal liability for the preparation of tax crimes as themselves? And if not, are they subject to any other form of punishment? Ioannis, please.
As you may know, Greece is the last stronghold against criminal liability of legal persons, and we in Germany. Germany has something like criminal liability, the Ordnungswidrigkeiten, but we're the last stronghold, and I hope we remain. So I know that my friend Dimitris and Vasilis may disagree, but I think this is the right way. If we want something like a criminal liability, we can develop a sanctions law for legal persons only, and not try to resemble the categories of the criminal law. So there is no criminal liability, only administrative liability and civil liability for legal persons.
Yannis, if you can expand on this, because this is very clear, everything you said about administrative liability. Are the sanctions that can be imposed to corporations through the administrative liability, do you think are deterrent enough, and are or not, or you need something more?
When the tax evader is a legal person, the administrative fines imposed on the legal person may cause his sudden death, because the fines are very severe. So he has to pay the debt, to pay the fines, and sometimes it's very difficult for this legal entity to continue its business. So actually the sentence, you don't need a criminal liability, because the administrative sentence is very severe. It's even more severe than the criminal liability is only a label. If the legal entity is forced to close its business, why do you need a criminal liability? You
This
have
is clear. This is
convicted the legal person to die.
This is
During that
clear.
sentence.
Before giving the words to Dimitrios and Antonis, just to finish this interesting discussion with you. So the pecuniary sanction, added to the tax evaded can be a death sentence
It's
for
a
the
death
corporation.
sentence.
Yeah, I understand it. Now, but you said that there is no distinction between criminal liability and administrative liability. So I have a question for you. Is in a way this administrative liability for the corporation having some effects like the barring, for example, corporation to practice and have contracts, public procurements as a conviction
Yes.
or not? They have it?
There are such administrative sanctions too. If you owe the state a great amount of money, you cannot participate in state contracts or participate in 10 tenders which give away state contracts. Yes, of course, there are such administrative
So
sanctions.
this is associated to the administrative liability. Thank you very much. So Dimitrios, please.
No, I just want to say I'm not sure that we disagree with Ioannis, because the question is what we consider as a criminal liability and criminal sanctions. I mean, there are provisions for sanctions against legal persons, and in my opinion, they can be considered as criminal. And I think also the European Court of Justice and also, generally, they should be considered as criminal sanctions. And adding to that, I just wanted to mention that there is a general provision. I think it is quite hidden in the law about the money laundering, and it has to do with a general criminal liability acts of, let's say, people responsible or responsible for legal persons that has to do with money laundering, but also with all other offenses described in the law of money laundering. They could lead to a sanction against a legal person. So I think there is a general provision regarding sanctions. Let's not call them criminal, but they are severe enough regarding legal persons and criminal liability of legal persons.
Thank you very much, Dimitrios. And we have Antonis, I think.
Thank you. I was trying to point out exactly what the issue that Dimitrios raised, which is actually that the liability, which is of an administrative nature, but it is for crimes beginning with money laundering and continuing with all predicate offenses, as Dimitrios correctly stated, which are rather severe. One could disagree for crimes that are of higher value of 10 million euros could be higher if the penalty, if the revenue raised from the crime is bigger. Now, on the text if we check out the tax evasion, I would agree. However, the problem is that this regulation is mostly of theoretical nature, because for most companies, SDOE, the service in which the other Ioannis works, is responsible, and I don't think that they have ever raised the fine, besides one case which was thrown away by the administrative courts. And so it is of theoretical nature. Now, on the terms of tax evasion, I would agree with present Ioannis that the administrative fines, the real administrative fines, are adequate enough. However, for other crimes in which a corporation finds important gains from crime, and I would say corruption offenses on the one hand and money laundering on the other, the issue of liability, either administrative or quasi-criminal or criminal directly, could be raised in a better and more efficient way. Because now we have a provision for which, for even the experts, is rather hidden. And why it is hidden? Because it is not implemented.
And this reconnects a bit to the issue, I think, of lobbying and big schemes, because of course this is connected in a way, I think.
I don't know. It could be.
Of course, it's very difficult to find evidence of that. Very, very interesting points. I will just give the word to our national project experts about the two issues that we look at. So also the resources, revolving door, and corporate liability. So Vasilis and Nikos, and also Donato, I think, is there with us.
Nikos left. He had to go to a class greeting or something. But,
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you,
So
Vasilis.
Me, yeah, okay. So I just wanted to add that somehow we also agree. We don't actually disagree with Yannis and Dimitris. It's just that there are some kind of administrative fines that are also have the character of a sentence. And in the end of the day, I think that it's for the better of the corporation to have a criminal law or criminal procedural law, because you will also accept some basic ideas of the criminal procedure that do not exist in the administrative law. So I think in the end of the day, it's better for corporations to have a criminal law. Of course, it will not be, this will create some issues of nebis in idem, but I think if a new legislation would be to come, or would come, then these kind of issues would also regulate. Because in the end of the day, also I agree with Yannis. So when you have a penalty that it leaves you out of business, then it's a death sentence. A death sentence for a business, for a corporation, it's not as if it's not a sentence. It's not just an administrative penalty. And just to a small remark on what Konstantinos said about this specific legislation concerning money laundering that also Dimitris said. I don't think that actually it's the result of a kind of lobbying that it does not come to use. It's just that prosecutors and also the administrative courts are not aware of it somehow, because we are not used in having this kind of administrative sanctions, some specific, let's say, norms concerning these administrative sanctions, whereas in most cases, these administrative penalties are imposed in predicate offenses. So that's, by me, I don't want to ask any kind of questions, any further questions. I think everything is covered.
Thank you very much, Vasilis. These were very important points, and so yes, these new laws are new and technical, so they have to be trained to use them, and they have to become, accustomed to these kind of things. It's very clear the point. Now, the last specific question before the question 12, that is a general open question, is about whistleblowing. So, how do you evaluate, first of all, the role of whistleblowing in unveiling fraudulent or corrupt practices in indirect taxation? Are they relevant? Should they be relevant? Any experience of cases? So first, let's start discussion, then we go for the sub questions. Yannis, please. Please, Yannis.
Yes. I think that we, at first we must make the distinction between a whistleblower and a crown witness. A whistleblower can only be a public servant within the revenue service, the public revenue service, who gives away his colleagues. We don't have much of this in Greece, so the actual whistleblowing. On the other hand, when you're giving away tax amnesty for tax evaders or perpetrators who are willing to give away public servants who get bribed. So bribery, so perpetrators of a bribe. We have some of this. It is a case that I was engaged as a criminal defense lawyer, and I think it's the only case where there was a tax amnesty granted. But if we see the case as a whole, this was actually a very sophisticated scheme of tax fraud. There was this lady, the case which I'm referring to is the following. There was this lady who had a business trading gold. So she got in touch with the authorities and the Internal Affairs Authority of the police and said that there is corruption in SDOE, in one of the financial bodies. So this lady actually lured or made a very sophisticated entrapment of through her lawyer of a public servant. There was also wiretapping and all these things. She was granted tax amnesty for her being a crown witness, not actually a whistleblower, but a crown witness. She was granted tax amnesty, and the case was prosecuted, and the public servant was convicted. Now, also in the second instance, the intermediaries, etc., etc. The problem here is, in my opinion, that is the, let's say, that's normal. The problem is that this woman got a tax amnesty, and as it was shown in court, this lady was overstating deductions to get input credits, and so asked for a VAT tax refund. And actually to ask for a tax VAT refund because she said she was buying gold here in Greece and was exporting gold to Germany, to another EU state. So she was entitled to input credits because she had paid her supplier, and due to exporting gold to another EU member state, she didn't need to pay. She was tax exempt. She got an input credit, and now she makes a claim for a VAT tax refund of 5 million euros, which this claim is based on her tax amnesty and on the conviction of the public servant who is alleged to got a bribe. Now, it's not a final decision because the case will be referred to after cassation to the cassation court. Now, the issue here is this. There are evidence that she lured them in, that she acted as an agent provocateur to entrap the public servant to offer him a bribe in order to get the tax amnesty and get the VAT tax refund.
Yannis, sorry if I interrupted. This is very clear to me, and a very interesting case, but it's going to a different direction because we would like to focus on whistleblowing. So, in terms of whistleblowing, we have not only the scenario where somebody from the tax authority can speak about the colleagues, but we have also the other scenarios like using the notion of whistleblowing of the European Union directive that, for example, within a big accounting firm. There is an accountant that knows that the accounting firm is helping some others to evade the taxation, or in a law firm, there is a lawyer, or inside a company. So there is a person that is an employee of the company and understand that the company is evading taxation. So if they speak up, of course, they are whistleblowers because they are working inside the corporation or the entity. So my question is, are they relevant in Greece?
No.
If they are not, yeah. So no.
The
If it's
the
no,
answer is no.
why
In
they
my
are
opinion.
why they are not where, as Christos said, without intrusive investigation techniques like Fontappi, we
There are
don't
social
discover a lot of
reasons.
things.
Yes,
So why they are not?
The roots of that, the reasons are social, because in this country has experienced civil war and has experienced the military regime, and giving away people is considered as a social, let's say, misbehavior.
This is very interesting.
The reasons are social.
So there is
We
a
don't
cultural,
like the
socio-cultural issue.
It's
Okay.
a social-cultural issue, in my opinion.
I like this, but I wanted to also to ask the others about, do you think that the legislation helped them to come out? And do you think that the few ones, because there should be few, there are retaliation against them? What is the case? So let's start with Dimitrios, then Antonis, and then Christos. And then we go back to Ioannis. So Antonis, you're muted.
Okay, so if I begin, then the legislation is inadequate. And I'd like to raise the issue that with the current form of the EU directive, tax evasion as such is not covered. So if there is this means of tax evasion, we are talking about the differences. If we have very specialized tax avoidance schemes, it could be used in the wording of very particular cases of 2017 and 18 in Central Europe, namely Luxembourg. These kinds of situations are covered by the letter of the Directive 1937. So I'm pretty worried that if there is motamot approval and adoption of the directive in the Greek legal system, then tax evasion won't be covered at all. This is my comment from experience. I would like to point out more experienced persons. Thank you.
Antonis, this is interesting. So your perspective for the future, because we know that the directive is just the minimum standard. Do you think that they can expand in Greece likely to tax evasion, or do you think that this is out of the debate?
I'm not sure, because there is a drafting committee which has not provided to the public or to TI Greece, despite it has asked any input of their directions for the transposition of the directive. It is permitted to be an all crimes approach, or more crimes than already inscribed in the directive. I think and I hope that a bigger perspective is adopted, and gives me reason to hope that Greece has transposed the Convention of ILO for persons who are harassed, and it provides for a whistleblowing mechanism, and this has been in Greek law.
Antonis, this is clear. Let's hope for the best. And before giving the word to the others, a specific case, 1 minute case, please.
Which for the case that?
Yeah, there is any specific case you would like to?
Not really, because actually for tax evasion, there are a lot of people complaining, or people who say that their neighbors have unexplained wealth and this might provide the interest of the tax authorities, or some cases of corruption against co-workers which are anonymous in order sometimes for competition reasons inside the service. I have heard these stories, but these are largely anecdotal, so I cannot provide.
I agree, and they
hard
technically
case.
they cannot. The first one, for example, are not whistleblowing. They are, informants, if you want to call them like that. Christos, from a prosecutorial perspective.
Well, in Greece, we had only one case with protected witnesses. And in this case, unfortunately, one of the prosecutors who took part in the investigation is under prosecution now. So this case this progress of things might be negative for other prosecutors to use these provisions in order to take profit from procedural profit from protected witnesses. So in my opinion, not only for tax crimes, but in general, whistleblowers and such protected witnesses in general will not be a part of the Greek pre-trial stage or the Greek criminal trial in general after this phenomenon. Although, despite of this, all anonymous reports that might be written by such persons, members of the staff of the companies, are taken into consideration by the prosecutors and are passed to these research bodies, special investigators of financial police and SDOE, as we said, this financial body. But from my experience, such cases that derive from anonymous or with false names reports don't go beyond far away. They don't. Nobody is condemned after such cases. Because we need witnesses and we need details. We need answers to questions. And after an anonymous report, all the reports from the research bodies don't lead. Nearly all the reports don't lead to the prosecutions that.
Christos, this is very, very, very interesting, and this the interrelation between, for example, potential anonymous channels for whistleblowing and then practical use of this information in court without a witness. Very, very clear point. Just to clarify, because something is not clear to me, when you said the two prosecutors, one is under charges, what is the nature of the charge? Because otherwise we don't appreciate the issue. Why is the prosecutor under investigation? For what crime?
For the abuse of prosecutorial powers.
Abuse of prosecutorial. Okay, now it's clear the scenario. Thank you so much, Christos. Ioannis, and who else? Ioannis, please.
Thank you very much. I wanted to add something to what Christos says. Actually, this case to which Christos referred to was a major blow against the whistleblowing institution, because this prosecutor abused the institution in order to prosecute political persons. And when I say abuse, I meant that she granted the whistleblowers protection, witness protection that's granted for whistleblowers without mining the relevant law provisions. For example, these people pursued a financial interest. They were the same. It was afterwards revealed that they applied for compensation for some kind of financial compensation in the United States, and that's forbidden under Greek law. A whistleblower is a public interest witness who does not pursue a personal financial interest.
This is Yannis, this is very interesting to me. The first thing is that, of course, there is the risk of the instrumental use of whistleblowers in general.
But it was the first major case. That the problem is that it was the first major case.
Yeah, but my question now is,
the institution was used, and when you get an abuse in the first major case that the institution was applied, that leaves a bad memory.
Yeah, no.
That's why Christos said that it will be a problem.
Yannis, this is very clear, a very good point. But I wanted you to expand a bit, just a bit, because we are over time, when you said the motivation of whistleblowers in Greece. So, is that relevant? It seems that in Greece is relevant. You cannot, if your motivation is making money or something else, you are not considered, a right whistleblower, irrespective of the fact that you are saying unveiling a criminal conduct. Is motivation important in Greece?
Yes, in Greece, motivation is important. That's the reasons are cultural. The reasons are cultural. Motivation is important because we have this saying that everybody wants the neighbor's goat to die.
This is interesting, and so in general,
let the neighbor's house go up in flames.
No. This is clear.
That's why whistleblowers are disliked in Greece.
Yeah.
They bring this mentality.
This is interesting, and they see a big distance. Unfortunately, Nikos is not here, from the United States system where they can be rewarded. So I understand that there is a big gap. This is very interesting for us. We're finished. I don't know if Basileus will say something or somebody else. Dimitrios wanted to say something, I think, on this.
No, I just want to say that we have this provision about the whistleblowers regarding corruption crimes since 2014, and I don't think that there are any case or many cases, and that's a proof of what Ioannis said before. And I don't know if much will change with the new directive, the implementation of the new directive. I have the feeling that this will only be at least it will only be it will not be a real protection of the people, of the whistleblowers. And as Christos said, I'm not sure about the compatibility of the directive with the Greek criminal procedure, and especially the anonymous. Yes.
Dimitrios, this is very interesting. Vasilis.
Just to add just one sentence, perhaps that whistleblowers in Greece, of course, are not rewarded. They are not rewarded. And when the legislator introduced this institution, he specifically said that we do not want whistleblowers to be rewarded. We will go 100% the opposite way of the United States. This might make perhaps the way more inefficient, but in the end of the day, we will have, so to say, a decent whistleblower, a whistleblower that will not go for profit. Well, we'll see if this changes.
This is interesting. And so the last question is an open question. If you had a magic wand to say now we want to change this in Greece to make the fight against corruption and tax crimes better, what is, how you can use this in a way? So let's, everybody can say something. So maybe we start with Ioannis. I give you the magic wand now.
Well, we could abolish taxes.
That's a good point. I mean,
we could abolish taxation. Okay, to be more realistic, a common tax rate. A global common tax rate is the first one. Concerning VAT tax should be reduced to a minimum and a common global minimum, because when you when you raise the VAT tax, then you give people enough reasons to try to falsify or make invalid invoices in order to get a VAT tax refund, or to get an input credit and to make money out of the state.
Good point. Dimitrios.
It's all, and of course, I will abolish the smuggling offense from the Greek legislation.
Dimitrios, please.
I don't know. I would I would focus on the tax authorities and that they do more controls. Not so much. I wouldn't focus so much on the legislation. I think the legislation is in a quite good point right now, and I think the problem with tax crime has to do also with the general pathogens or the general problems of the judicial criminal system. And I mean, in Greece, the statute of limitation is considered to be just the limit of a criminal procedure. It only reduces the criminal procedure. It sets a limit for the criminal procedure. That's not the way it should function. And if you need 5 years in order to find out a misdemeanor, or 15 years in order to find out if there was a felony, then that's a general problem, I think.
Very good point. Thank you so much. Christos?
I will use an example. I don't know if you have ever visited the United States and Washington, D.C. If you go there, there is a possibility that you will see a square depicting father lions who are ready to intervene to solve problems of their children. The children are playing, and father lions are ready to solve the problems. This square is devoted to law enforcement authorities. I don't think that in Greece we might have a similar square devoted to the work of law enforcement people. So this is, in my opinion, the mentality. In the mentality of the people lies the problem to fight crime. Okay.
So you would like to change the perception of people, of public authorities, and the culture of people in relation to
how they attend to the law enforcement people, how they consider them to be important or not.
This is very clear. Thank you very much. Antonis?
Well, two things. I would like to see much better coordination when they do stuff. The examples from Christos are very clear, where like a ball. A case goes like a ball when it comes to tax evasion, smuggling, or financial crimes in general in Greece. And much more transparency in the legislative and the regulating process. That would improve everything much faster and would be much clearer for everybody involved.
Thank you very much. Vasilis, last but not least.
Thank you. Well, if I'd like to add something, perhaps in a more practical way, I think that perhaps a possibility of tax authorities to assign tax investigations to private persons, perhaps to auditors, would in some cases solve some kind of problems. It would speed certain procedures, and perhaps it would lead to a better result in some cases. So that's from my side. Once more, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. We are 2 hours in the future in Greece, as I'm used in saying when I speak with people from the United Kingdom. So I feel personally obliged to all of persons in the panel who joined us today and spent 3 hours of a Friday afternoon with us. And from my point of view, once more, thank you very much, Konstantino, and all the participants for your time and for everything.
Thank you, Vasilis. Lorenzo, before the last words.
Nothing, just a big thanks to everyone. This has been really thorough, and I really enjoyed every moment of it. Thank you so much.
So let me conclude this workshop by saying thank you so much for the fascinating discussion, incredible insights, the debate that we had. That was fantastic. And again, I would like to thank Vasilis for his crucial support. And of course, I think that he will be very glad to include a lot of references in the report to this debate that we had, that was so stimulating. So thank you very much, and take care. I stop the recording now.